Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, the Middle East and the protests that started in Tunisia. How far will they spread? India. Politicians, lobbyists, and the media.
What kind of story do you want?
Too close for journalistic comfort. One of the loudest voices on the American airwaves has been silenced for now.
This is the last edition of Countdown.
And the people who still don't quite get how to Google something in our web video of the week. Last week, we brought you the story of the first popular overthrow of an Arab government in a generation and the role that the media played in that story. We asked the question, would what happened in Tunisia and the news coverage of the uprising lead to a contagion effect and result in similar movements elsewhere in the Arab world? This week, we have our answer, and it came from Egypt, Yemen, and Algeria in the form of street protests. Among the questions that remain largely unanswered, how far will Arab governments go to contain opposition movements that have taken to the streets? What steps will they take to stifle the news coverage of those protests? And what can or will they do to choke off the supply line of information from activists, the news and images that they provide through the use of social media that mainstream news outlets then use in their coverage? We'll get to Tunisia in a few minutes, but our starting point this week is Cairo and the country that everybody in the Middle East is watching, Egypt.
First Tunisia and now Egypt is tasting its own dose of people power.
We need this regime to go.
But in spite of the heavy-handed tactics, the demonstrators show no signs of giving up.
On day one of the demonstrations in Egypt, Nile TV, the state-controlled channel, covered the story, sort of. The reporter talked about a crowd gathering as opposed to protesting over the economy, unemployment, and freedom of speech issues. But there was no mention of politics or President Hosni Mubarak. That's why some Egyptians call Nile TV the Nile TV. The print version of the story varied depending on the newspaper.
The Al Akhbar daily newspaper, a semi-official paper, its headline on Wednesday, the second day after the protests, saying protests in some areas, in a few areas, calm in most provinces, clearly trying to downplay the protest. By contrast, the opposition newspapers and independent newspapers had much stronger words. The daily Al-Wafd, affiliated with the opposition party Al-Wafd, had a very strong headline, an uprising of anger in Egypt. The popular independent Al-Masr al-Yom summed its headline in one word: a warning.
Across the Middle East, governments have been using their media to contain the contagion. And Tunisia's neighbors, Algeria and Morocco, weren't very subtle about it. Algerian news anchors were headlining the new government in Tunis 1 minute, announcing price cuts for cooking oil and sugar in Algiers the next. Moroccan TV also dealt with the kind of pocketbook issues that sparked the Tunisian protests, with stories of upward social mobility.
Cet immeuble de 4 étages abritera bientôt 2 familles. Des familles qui ont toujours habité dans des baraques exiguës et insalubres. Pour elles, vivre dignement dans une maison en dur est un rêve qui se réalise.
With all these mouthpieces of governments, I don't think people are listening one bit to what they have to say, you know, other than to see, you know, the difference between how they're covering it and how things are really unfolding. I don't think they're given any credibility, and I'd be surprised if the governments themselves really expected people to trust their media sources either.
In Tunisia, the media, which used to be state-controlled, has now been told by the state that it is free.
With regular talk-in shows on radio and television that in turn have allowed people to express themselves freely, something unthinkable just a week ago.
But will the new government, once it is fully formed and functioning, be prepared to live with that?
If there is to be a system of governance based on the rule of law,
then the rule of law can govern what the media does in a perfectly adequate way. So I think the chances are quite high that you will get a much more open media.
I would say it's much too soon to start holding Tunisia up as a beacon of media freedom. Though the changes have certainly been fast, it appears from most reports the Tunisian internet in particular is still being filtered, though certainly not to the degree that it was previously. There's a lot of opposition to this. Tunisia has long had a strong anti-censorship movement, and they're still fighting for a freer internet.
These are the headquarters of the Al Dustur online newspaper.
A free internet is a critical aspect of the power battle in Egypt. Opposition activists need it, not just to get the news out, but to organize the demonstrations that make news.
After the ouster of Ben Ali, literally a few minutes after news broke, activists in Egypt took to the internet, to their Twitter accounts, Facebook and other chat rooms, calling on Egyptians to have an uprising of their own. As a result, later on Tuesday, many people were unable to access their accounts.
Internet filtering in the region generally is fairly pervasive, with most countries filtering to some degree or another. Egypt used to be one of the freer countries in terms of the internet. However, we've seen Twitter and Facebook both become blocked, as well as a bunch of local news sites.
Dear citizens of the world.
Remember Anonymous, the internet activists who attacked websites like Amazon and Visa when those corporations ended their dealings with WikiLeaks? Now they've weighed in on Egypt and freedom of expression.
To the Egyptian government, Anonymous wants you to offer free access to uncensored media in your entire country. When you ignore this message, not only will we attack your government websites, Anonymous will also make sure that the international media sees the horrid reality you impose upon your people.
Egyptian protesters wanted the reality of their demonstrations covered, and they complained, particularly on the first day of the protests, that there wasn't enough coverage, including on Al Jazeera. 15 years after the advent of Arab satellite news, and just days after the fall of Ben Ali in Tunis, Egyptians sense the pivotal role media may play in their political future.
That initial 15 years was one in which the satellite stations played a role of kind of vicarious expressors of sentiment. Ordinary citizens could turn on Jazeera and see somebody criticizing the Egyptian leader or some Arab dictator that they didn't like. It didn't translate into a process of political change. Neither did any of the different forms of new media. Now what you have in Tunisia, because the media played an adjunct, played a role in that. As such, the media has now a dimension to it. Jazeera and the satellite Arab TV stations have a dimension which is beyond emotional letting off steam and actually mobilizing for political change. So this is a historic moment, I think, in the modern Arab media.
Our Global Village voices now on the protests, specifically how Arab media have been covering the story.
Arab governments and their media arms will definitely play down the Tunisian protests. But that's going to be kind of hard given the fact that demonstrations are happening in Algeria, in Jordan, in Egypt, and in Yemen. The Arab public is very smart, and they have been able to use the internet and to use new media sources very cleverly. The digital revolution is turning into a political revolution that is playing out in the streets of the Arab Middle East.
The big coverage of the Tunisian revolution by the media stimulated a lot of Arabic people in many countries and re-energized the idea that the dream, the freedom dream, might well become true. As a matter of fact, I believe that without the media coverage, the fee barrier will take a long time to go down.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. Al Jazeera is dealing with the fallout from the Palestine Papers. That's what the network called the more than 1,700 leaked documents that it published relating to the Middle East peace process. The documents revealed that in negotiations with Israel, Palestinian officials went much further than previously believed on issues such as East Jerusalem and the refugees' right of return, and still failed to get an agreement with the Israelis. Lead Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat called Al Jazeera's reporting patently false and a smear campaign, said it was lacking in context without getting into specifics. And there was anger directed at Jazeera in the West Bank, primarily in Ramallah, the power base of Fatah and the Palestinian Authority. A crowd of demonstrators tried but failed to get into the Al Jazeera bureau there. In a nearby but unrelated story, an Al Jazeera satellite truck was attacked and set on fire in Lebanon. Protesters belonging to the Future movement accuse Al Jazeera of sympathizing with Hezbollah. The American media and political discourse have just grown a little bit quieter. MSNBC's Keith Olbermann is no longer on the air. The outspoken political commentator surprised his viewers January 21st, telling them they were watching his last show.
This is the last edition of Countdown.
Olbermann was a love him or hate him kind of guy. He is credited with sparking MSNBC's ratings surge by leading the 24-hour news channel's move to the political left, where it became a counterweight to Fox News on the right. He was scathing of the Bush administration.
The president has resorted anew to the sleaziest fear-mongering and mass manipulation of an administration.
He picked fights with Fox News, particularly host Bill O'Reilly.
Our number one story in the countdown, Billo the Clown has jumped the shark tank that is delusional paranoia.
He created a segment called Worst Person in the World.
LeBron's Senator Scott Brown of Massachusetts.
He even channeled the legendary journalist Ed Murrow in his special comments right down to the sign-off.
Good night and good luck.
He also clashed with MSNBC management frequently and was suspended last November for making donations to Democratic congressional candidates. Olbermann has been uncharacteristically quiet on the reasons for his departure. Apparently that's not by choice. It's a contractual stipulation. Part of his settlement deal with the network forbids him discussing the reasons for his departure. Some free advice for anyone thinking of giving information to Julian Assange or his organization, WikiLeaks. If you're going to do that, it's best not to do it on camera. At a January 17th news conference in London, former Swiss banker Rudolf Elmer handed Assange some computer disks. He indicated the CDs contained details of some offshore bank accounts. Elmer's former employer is a Swiss-based bank, Julius Baer. Within a week of that news conference, Elmer was in police custody in Zurich, being questioned over possible breaches of Swiss banking rules. Switzerland's banks are famously secretive, which the country's laws allow for. That makes them particularly susceptible to the kind of reporting that WikiLeaks provides. And after releasing that flood of diplomatic cables, Julian Assange did say that he planned a big release of leaked banking documents, enough, he said, to possibly take down a bank or two. A studio audience in Italy got a little more than it bargained for when a fuming Silvio Berlusconi phoned in while the program was live on air and started abusing the show's host.
Buonasera, Presidente Berlusconi, mi sente?
Sì, buonasera.
The 74-year-old prime minister interrupted a live recording of L'Infedele, that translates to unfaithful, a news talk show that airs on LA7, one of the relatively few TV channels in Italy that Berlusconi doesn't own. The host, Gad Lerner, was busy discussing allegations of sexual impropriety by Mr. Berlusconi when the call came through. The Prime Minister accused Mr. Lerner of hosting a television brothel and said, quote, "What I have seen is crude, cruddy, and repugnant. What you have broadcast is false, could not be further from the truth. I know what I am talking about, and you don't," unquote. He then appeared to ask Iva Zanicki, an MP in the European Parliament, to get up and leave the set before he hung up. This is the third time in 6 months that Mr. Berlusconi has intervened in a television broadcast to make his opinions known. Roman Catholics trying to square their religious beliefs with the offerings and temptations of new media are getting some mixed messages from the Vatican. Last year, Pope Benedict was preaching the benefits of social media as a great place to foster friendships and to spread the gospel. But now Benedict is urging youngsters to be wary of the dangers of the internet. Try to make real friends, he says, not virtual ones. It's been suggested the Pope could be bearing a grudge against the web after WikiLeaks revealed that U.S. diplomatic cables said Benedict refused to allow Vatican officials to testify over child abuse allegations against the Catholic Church in Ireland. The Vatican does have a YouTube channel, which it updates daily. It's also on Facebook. But the Pope doesn't have his own personal page. We know because we checked. There are a few fake Pope Benedict pages there, and one unfortunate British schoolboy. His name is Benedict Pope, and he appears surprised, perhaps by the number of friend requests he's getting from Catholics. 2010 will be remembered as a watershed year for Indian journalism, and not a particularly good one. The country's news media found themselves in the dock when a scandal now known as Radiagate hit the headlines. The story centered on a corporate and political lobbyist, Neera Radia. Ms. Radia's list of contacts includes some of India's most influential journalists. She spoke to them often, but what she didn't know is that many of those conversations were being taped by the Indian government as part of a tax investigation. The call logs were made public and laid bare the cozy and very questionable links between politics, business, and the mainstream news media in the country. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on Radiagate and the aftershocks that are still being felt within India's journalistic circles.
Over the last couple of months, this is what Indians have been listening to. The conversations between the lobbyist
They're very conscious of every line, everything.
and the journalist.
No, it has to be fully scripted. We have to rehearse it before the cameras come in. So now what? What should I tell them? Tell me, what should I tell them?
What you saw on the tapes was almost a kind of blindness of people who have drinks together. It's a kind of cocktail party circuit. You move into television studios, you pretend to have debates, but you're really drinking and socializing with the same people.
I think the reason for the outrage is for the first time we had tangible proof that there could be more going on behind the scenes than is immediately aware to the news consumers. We had audio tapes, we had prominent journalists speaking on these audio tapes. None of the people who spoke on the audio tapes came back and refuted their voices.
The publication that zeroed in on the calls between Radia and the journalists was Open Magazine, a new kid on India's media block. The magazine's editor, Manu Joseph, knew a hot story when he saw one.
But I didn't anticipate 2 million people accessing our story just in the days that followed the expose. It's the media that people have their hopes on in India. And sometimes a large, complex story can be told very well through one or two interesting characters or important characters.
Actually, there are 3 interesting characters, including Radia, the lobbyist. The other 2 are journalists, Barkha Dutt of NDTV and columnist Veer Sanghvi. They are big media names with big reputations, and those reputations suffered when the call logs were published.
Okay, now I get it.
Veer Sanghvi offered to script a column to suit what Neera Radia was telling him.
So what kind of story do you want? Because this will go as counterpoint, so it will be like most read. So it can't seem too slanted, yet it's an ideal opportunity to get all the points across.
Hi, did I wake you up?
No, I've been up, yeah.
What Barkha did was a great impropriety, and I think an act of vanity almost.
Everybody I know in the Congress was just swearing in. So I haven't been able to speak to the top guys. Now it's just finished, and now I'm going to make my set of calls.
As a journalist, she shouldn't really have been doing that, or she should have been reporting on the fact that a corporate lobbyist was lobbying for a particular minister.
The rise of privately owned Indian media has been rapid, but that has been accompanied by growing pains. The country is the 2nd largest newspaper market, behind only China. It's television, though, that really leads the media pack. Back in 2005, there were 44 news channels in the country. 5 years later, there were 115. One might think that all those news-hungry media outlets would jump on this story. But Indian media tend to go easy when they're reporting on themselves.
And even after the recordings were put up on the internet and had become the subject of wide debate on the streets and on the internet, a lot of media houses were hesitant, were reluctant to pick it up and talk about it. That is sort of reflective of how wary they are of talking about each other.
The relative silence could not and would not last.
Many viewers have asked why we haven't done a show on this. Are we trying to hide something?
Barkha Dutt's network, NDTV, eventually dealt with the issue on air.
This debate was framed as if this was about a scam.
It was one of the most unusual TV shows to be broadcast in India. The media put on trial by the media.
I was told that I can ask questions to Barkha and she would answer. But then Barkha, being Barkha, she behaved as if she was the anchor of the show, which she was not.
If you look at my reputation, I do not believe that in 16 years, anybody has ever cast a question mark on my personal integrity.
You were talking to Neera Radia, who's a corporate PR, who represents 2 telecom companies,
And they seem to be interested in one person becoming a telecom minister. And any journalist will know that is a very important story.
Where did you get that indication in her conversations with me?
And I was not happy with her answers. And so all this, it was a very hostile show, you know. In retrospect, it seems very comical to me, but it was very hostile. Obfuscating the issue.
I am not obfuscating. I think you should let me answer.
We have only 1 minute. I think it's a show many of us will remember, especially me.
Before this story became an expose on the failings of Indian media, it actually started with a piece of quality journalism. For 2 years, J. Gopikrishnan, a reporter for the Pioneer newspaper, chased a story of a corrupt telecoms minister and his dealings with private phone companies. The recorded calls were a part of that original story.
Indian media always exposes the political corruption. In a corruption scam, they will expose the politicians, but they fail to expose the corporates who are the real bribe givers.
Indian media cannot take on corporate corruptions, is extremely enslaved to corporate interests. And that is because of the way Indian media is constructed. Our pricing is completely haywire. You're selling newspapers at ₹1. It costs much more to put that out. I feel the Indian audiences need to be trained to pay for news, to pay for truth-telling, so that we are not as dependent on advertisers and corporate magnanimity as we are.
In the months since Radiagate broke, few signs have emerged that lessons have been learned. Veer Sanghvi no longer has his column, but he remains on the editorial board of the Hindustan Times. Barkha Dutt is still a prominent face on NDTV. And the other journalists caught on tape with the lobbyists still have their jobs.
Personally, I don't think this is going to change anything. Is it going to change the way media companies operate? No. Is it going to change the way corporates operate? No. Is it going to change the way corporates talk to media companies? Probably not. I feel that the only change could be that newspapers and corporates are going to tell their reporters and their public relations professionals that next time they want to talk about topics like this, please don't get caught. So they will probably continue to interact in this way. They'll just make sure that they don't get caught.
Or that their phones are not bugged.
More Global Village Voices now on India and the news story that hit the news business.
I do not think anyone was naive enough to believe that the Indian media was independent of this sort of news lobbying. What is shocking, however, is that the senior journalists with major news agencies, and then on top of that, they tried shamelessly to deny it. One would have thought that the rest of the media would come out opinionated and critical to this bending of journalistic ethics, but they were as complicit in this entire debacle with their silence.
The Radia tape showed how leading political journalists were working not to inform us, the viewers and readers, but to influence government policy, fix corporate deals, and decide who the Minister of Telecom will be. The tapes also show as many as 40 leading business journalists working for the lobbies near Radia. Now we know why the feel-good factor never goes out of the Indian media, why the economy is always right and everything is fine. Because they work not for us, but for the big business who wants it that way.
Finally, we've all been in this position. You're standing behind somebody or sitting next to them while they're on their computer. It could be your dad or a friend who's not particularly adept with technology and does things very slowly. It's not easy to just sit there and wait while they take a minute to accomplish what you and a few speed keys could get done in 5 seconds. That feeling of impatience, frustration, and yes, even anger is captured in our web video of the week through a character who still hasn't figured out how to Google properly. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.